This is the multi-voice text-to-speech podfic reading of Revelio by Imparfait, composed by Burning Aurora and Caliana. September 1976. It happens like this. On the 1st of September 1976, Lily Evans sits next to Sirius Black in the Great Hall. James Potter immediately panics. She sits in Remus Lupin's spot, since Remus is off in the hospital wing discussing 4 months of palliative care for his condition and not leaning up against Sirius's side, laughing warmly in his ear. Lily Evans sitting next to him is a recipe for disaster. There's no way he makes it out of the Great Hall unhexed. Besides that, Lily Evans is a poor understudy for Remus. She almost certainly isn't going to kiss him as a distraction tactic to stop him from making mischief, and Sirius won't much like it if she tries. On the other hand, Sirius can practically feel Snivellus' beady eyes on him, trying to bore holes into the back of his head from the Slytherin table behind him. That's fun. That's a good start to the term.
Hello, Evans,
he says, surprised.
Lily,
She says, resolute. James chokes on a dinner roll beside him.
Oh,
He laughs.
are you trying to get me killed? I haven't done anything to deserve it yet this year.
no,
She says.
is Potter all right?
Sirius spares a glance at James, who's still coughing and hitting himself in the chest.
No,
He says.
but he's never been, has he? Oi,
James says between gasping breaths.
you've been tapped in the head since birth, Potter. We all know it. What brings you to our end of the table, Evans?
Lily,
She says again.
and I've decided, Black, that we're going to be friends.
James chokes again, anew, and Sirius pities him long enough to pound him on the back.
We are.
Yes,
She says. Sirius narrows his eyes.
Is this a prank?
no,
He considers her for a moment. It dawns on Sirius that Evans might not have forgiven Snivellus for what he called her last spring.
Revenge.
He asks, more interested now. Her eyes flick away, and she almost half turns towards Slytherin.
no,
She says again.
Bullshit.
Sirius says cheerfully, because revenge is a genre of mischief.
But either way, I suppose I'm in. I'd offer to take you out behind Greenhouse 4, but even Snivellus knows I'm a queer. Peter, maybe.
Oi!
Potter shouts again.
I'm right here.
Oi!
Sirius mimics.
I'm going for realism here, Potter. Even motivated by spite and revenge, she'd hex your prick off.
A ghost of a smile crosses Evans's lips. Sirius decides he's going to make her laugh, really laugh, at least once while they play this game. It's a public service. After a lifetime of friendship with Severus Snape, anyone would deserve a laugh.
Wormtail.
James wails pitifully and tosses his half-eaten roll at the back of Peter's head, where he's chatting with Meadows about her summer. He turns towards James, annoyed.
Sirius is being a bastard.
James tells him.
Sirius is always a bastard.
Wormtail says.
You like it.
Do not.
James twists his lips down into a mock of a frown. All brown-eyed woe is me.
Mooney likes it. Oh, Sirius.
He mocks in a high-pitched, squawking imitation of Remus's accent.
It's so cute when you're an absolute tosser.
Sirius hits him.
where is Remus?
Evans asks, casting her eyes around.
Mars.
Potter says.
The Italian Riviera.
Sirius says.
The hospital wing.
Pettigrew says over his shoulder as he turns to go back to his conversation with Meadows. And didn't that just take the fun right out of it?
Already?
Evans asks dryly.
Term hasn't even started yet, and you've already set fire to poor Remus.
James and Sirius share a look.
Our Mooney is having a clandestine love affair with Madame Pomfrey.
James says. He's a beat too late, but they're out of practice from a summer of everyone knowing.
Star-crossed lovers.
Sirius agrees solemnly, reaching for the chicken.
I'm heartbroken, but I persevere.
The revenge plot is very straightforward, Sirius thinks, as Evans settles next to him at a table in advanced charms. If all he's got to do is sit next to Evans for a few weeks, it's going to be the easiest prank he's ever played. He just hopes she doesn't forgive the slimy arsehole when it's all said and done. Sometime in second year, Professor Flitwick required Remus to sit between James and Sirius in some desperate, foolhardy attempt to have someone control the chaos. Hilarious, really. Mooney is the best of them, simply because Mooney never gets caught. The seating arrangement stuck, though, and it's practical now. Sirius and Remus are a firewall between Evans and James, with Peter on the end to soothe James's frayed nerves. It's been less than a full day, and the weight of Lily Evans is speaking to us has driven him to madness already. Sirius plans to compose a pep talk for later when they're alone. Maybe he'll see if McKinnon will take James to Hogsmeade, or failing that, hex some sense into him. Sirius would accept either from her. He's used to Evans crossing house lines, flouncing into a chair next to Snivellus and glaring at them for their laughter and their fun. Now she's next to him, neatly arranging a stack of bound parchment sheets and 3 different colored ink pots in front of her. He's a hurricane beside her, with his boots kicked up on the tabletop and his bag spilling parchment and textbooks out onto the stone floor underneath it. His quill is stuck through a messy bun of curls on top of his head. Mooney's nicked his ink, and that's all right. He might steal it back if he wants to doodle.
How do you learn like this?
Evans asks him, eyeing his boots on the desk as if they're going to eat her.
Don't know.
He answers.
It gets in there somehow, which annoyed my governess to no end.
You had a governess.
Course I did. Nothing less for the ancient and most mouldy house of Black.
He grins at her.
Primary school is for the proletariat.
She pulls a face.
Posh fucker.
Potter says, leaning forward to peer at him around Remus.
The only person with a governess in this room was you, and there are Slytherins in here.
If it's any consolation, she hated my guts and I hated hers.
Sirius says to Evans, ignoring him.
Madame Dubois, what a nightmare.
Don't get him started.
Remus warns.
She hit me.
Sirius grumbles.
With her wand right on my knuckles, hideous woman.
Peter groans.
Oh, Merlin, he started.
You probably deserved it.
James says sing-song. James is spared from a stinging hex, only because Snivellus sweeps into the room then, all sour lemon grimace and stringy hair. Snape's expression darkens when he sees Evans next to Sirius, and that's much more interesting than Potter squeaking like a baby. Sirius, never one to miss a good moment in a revenge plot, takes it as a cue to lean in close to Lily's ear.
See, Evans?
He whispers.
This is fun.
He doesn't look at Snape. It's better, he thinks, to leave all his attention on Evans instead. She bites back what might be a laugh. Sirius isn't sure, but it's close enough to work. He feels the weight of Snape's glare on him without even having to turn his head. Snape slams himself down into a chair on the opposite side of the room as Flitwick sweeps in. He knocks his wand against Sirius's boots on his way to the lectern.
Feet on the floor, Black.
He says.
Wands away, everyone. We're all theory today.
Grumbling, Sirius reorders himself and settles in for what is surely going to be the worst 2 hours of the day. But then Remus reaches between them. Brilliant, right-handed Remus. He catches Sirius's hand in his and tangles their fingers together under the table. He supposes there are worse ways to spend a morning than holding Mooney's hand and bothering the hell out of Severus Snape without even trying.
It's half-decent mischief.
Sirius says to James while he stirs in the peeled shrivel fig to their cauldron.
A bit simple, but she's a novice.
James whacks his pestle down against their chunk of unicorn horn with a snort.
I don't see the big picture.
He says.
There's no endgame, is there? Not that I'm complaining. She's speaking to me, kindly.
Sirius stirs twice anti-clockwise and taps his wand against the lip of the cauldron 4 times. Potions are fiddly, stupid things, he decides while trying to read Potter's chicken scratch notes on step 34. And it has nothing to do with Mooney not being in the class, or this being the only thing that Severus Snape is better at than him, no matter what the 4-eyed arseface next to him has to say about it.
There mightn't be an endgame. He hates me. He'll hate her being friendly to me. She wins.
He hates everyone.
James reminds him.
He's hateful and hateable.
He seems to like Evans.
Sirius says.
But anyway, if I were her and I wanted to really twist the knife, I'd make friends with me too.
She could have been friends with me. He also hates me.
Sirius spares a glance across the room while the shrivel fig slowly turns their potion a disgusting blood red. Snape is sharing a table with Mulciber, casting furtive glances across at Evans, who is diligently chopping mandrake stems while McKinnon stirs. Snivellus looks particularly pathetic today, all sad-eyed like a bizarre funhouse mirror of the way James sometimes moons over Evans. That, Sirius thinks, is why it can't be James and it has to be him. Sirius will take that thought to the grave, but it's true.
I almost got him eaten.
Sirius points out.
Lily doesn't know that.
James counters.
And you didn't do it on purpose.
Sirius hums in agreement as he stirs 3 times and peers into the cauldron.
Is it supposed to be orange?
I think so.
James says.
The picture looks orangey.
I might have tried to get him eaten on purpose.
Sirius says. James blinks at him, owl-eyed behind his glasses.
You didn't.
James dumps the unicorn horn into the cauldron and they both lean back, half hoping for an explosion.
Padfoot, I saw your face. You didn't mean to.
And James is right, of course. They've been over this 1,000 times. James knows Sirius better than Sirius knows himself some days, but he doesn't need James to tell him anything about that night. As soon as the words left his mouth, he was trying to walk them back, knowing in his gut that he'd fucked up beyond all measure, but Snivellus couldn't keep his big nose out of their business.
Of course not.
He agrees.
But in the abstract, being rid of him is a net positive on the whole of wizarding society.
Well, yes, but he'll get himself tossed in Azkaban without our help, Padfoot.
James says. He drops a whole fanged walnut into the cauldron and it turns a deep blue.
That's done then. Just have to let it boil for 6 minutes and it should lighten.
We're a package deal for friendship anyway.
Sirius says, returning to his original point.
The 4 of us.
No, we aren't.
James prods his wand at the flame under the cauldron and it glows brighter.
She's been friends with Moony for ages. Hasn't done me anything toward getting in her good graces.
Oh, it's her good graces you want to be in, is it?
James chucks the pestle at him. Sirius ducks and it clatters to the floor. They're laughing, and when he looks up, Evans is watching them. The September moon is hard. Moony's been locked away all summer, left to bite himself to the bone and tear his own skin off. He wants to again, even with Padfoot there, snuffing at Moony's snout and doing his best to be distracting. He gets tossed clear across the shack for his effort, and his shoulder aches whenever he lifts his arm. The willow gets him good on the way out after moonset. One thick branch wallops him across the back and sends him sprawling face down into a muddy puddle. James casts a cleaning charm at him once he stops laughing, but Sirius still feels mud behind his ears and doesn't have the energy left to do fuck all about it if he's got leaves in his hair. It's so early it's still late. Hogwarts stills in the early hours of the morning when even Peeves is asleep. The portraits snore in their frames. It feels sometimes when they're taking the long walk back across the grounds and up to Gryffindor Tower after full moon nights that they're the only people in the world. Peter scurries off to the kitchen to beg breakfast off the elves, as is tradition. Sirius and James wait at the top of the grand staircase, off to the side between a suit of armor and the portrait of Edwin the Unsinkable, a jolly old wizard who's floating in a lake in an old bathing costume, his middle blown up like a balloon.
You've got detention again tonight.
James asks him.
It's Thursday.
Sirius peers around the suit of armor to watch for Wormtail.
I've got detention every Thursday for the rest of my life.
James lets out a frustrated sigh.
I wanted to work on the extracurricular cartography project tonight.
He says.
Tonight. I could fall asleep right here this minute. Even if I didn't have detention, I'm staying in.
Staying in the hospital wing, you mean?
He says.
Yes.
He says.
And if you have anything to say about it, I'd appreciate it if you shoved it up your own arse.
Sirius glares at him over his shoulder. Prongs has a soppy grin on his face, though, the one that says, I'm happy you're happy. Despite his bluster, Sirius always feels a secret little joy when he sees that look on Prongs' face.
I'll leave any arsehole business to you, a certified professional. Thank you.
James says cheerfully.
I'll let you take the cloak if you promise to map the 3rd floor under Ravenclaw Tower.
I don't need the cloak to go to the hospital wing.
He hears Slughorn laughing at the bottom of the stairs, and that is the last thing they need to deal with. He ducks back behind the armor.
Yeah, but you have to map the 3rd floor under Ravenclaw.
The only thing I'm mapping tonight is the path between Pumphrey's store cupboard and Moony's bed,
he says. Peter pops his head around the armor.
Sluggy cornered me.
He holds up a paper sack.
We're down a plate of bacon, but I've still got pastries.
They're exhausted and filthy when they pile back into the Gryffindor common room. Peter clutches his paper sack of pastries pilfered from the kitchen. Evans is sipping tea in an armchair by the fireplace. Sirius wonders which side of the day she saw sunrise from.
Good morning.
She eyes them suspiciously.
Long night.
You aren't allowed to scold us about it if you're Sirius's friend.
Peter says. He fishes out a croissant and holds it out to her.
Croissant.
She takes it from him gingerly.
Is it filled with something horrible?
Shouldn't be.
Peter digs one out for himself.
Usually it's strawberry jam, but there's always a chance it's something rotten like almonds.
I'll eat him if it's almonds.
Sirius says, throwing himself face down onto his favorite squashy couch. He lets out a jaw-cracking yawn.
Wake me up for charms this afternoon, will you?
He asks into the cushions.
Set an alarm charm. We're not your babysitters.
James says,
And you need a shower, Padfoot.
You look like you mud wrestled a hippogriff.
Peter adds.
Did you?
Evans asks.
No.
Sirius says,
I'm having a torrid affair with a centaur. Don't tell Remus, he'll be cross.
Still, it's a bit dangerous to go tromping around on a full moon night.
Evans says, and Sirius tenses.
Severus told me werewolves live in the forest.
Bigoted fuck.
Sirius says,
What's a werewolf going to do in the forest the other 27 days?
Well,
They're just people.
Sirius thinks about Remus in the hospital wing, smelling of dittany and antiseptic potions, with bandages on his arms, where Mooney tore into himself, and Padfoot couldn't do anything to stop him. Sirius suddenly wants to be anywhere else, but most especially in the hospital wing, curled around Remus and keeping him safe.
you're right.
She says, there's something unsettling behind her eyes, like she's discovering some hidden secret of his. So he looks away from her and stuffs his face back into the scarlet cushion under him. The only secret he's keeping isn't his to give away. He doesn't want her to see it on his face. James is right, he decides. He is filthy. He hefts himself off the couch with a groan, pilfers a croissant out of Wormtail's bag, and heads for the stairs. By the time he's showered, Pomfrey will have Remus settled in the little private room next to her office. She'll look the other way when Sirius sneaks inside, like she always does, because she has a soft spot a mile wide for the both of them. Sirius will curl up against him and sleep until charms. Then he'll light Severus Snape on fire for being a twat after class. It's not much, but it'll make him feel better. Saturday afternoon, after the moon in September brings them outside. They're spread out on a blanket and basking in the sun, enjoying the warmth before autumn puts a sharp bite of cold in the air. Peter wheedled a picnic out of the kitchen elves, a basket stuffed with cheese and sliced apples, ham sandwiches, meat pies, and for some inexplicable reason, an entire tray of roasted potatoes. James and Peter are taking turns conjuring smoke shapes and trying to guess what they are. Remus naps against Sirius's thigh while Sirius reads. He took a liking to Hope Lupin's collection of fantasy novels over the summer, and he's already tearing through the Muggle literature section of the library with a sort of determination even Pince is impressed with. Evans finds them during a tense argument over whether or not James's smoke bow truckle is an accurate depiction or not, and if Peter deserves points for saying stick figure, which isn't a wholly incorrect guess.
Do you mind?
She asks, motioning to the blanket they're sitting on.
He's been following me all day.
James nearly falls over himself, skittering across the blanket, making space for her. Peter offers her a sandwich and a selection of cheese, because Peter is polite in ways that Sirius and James sometimes forget. She declines and practically throws herself onto the blanket between Peter and Sirius. Sirius looks up from his book.
Need me to hex him?
I can hex him.
She says.
I don't want to.
Yeah, but that's what I'm for.
Sirius marks his spot in his book and sets it down.
Sirius Black, personal guard dog.
Peter snickers around a bite of his own sandwich. She picks at her fingernails.
No,
She says again.
it isn't worth it.
Evans.
He says.
If he's following you around, I'll have no problem striking some fear right into his cold, slimy heart. I'd actually enjoy it.
I'd rather talk about anything else, really.
She casts her eyes around at the four of them.
How was your summer?
Sirius is struck by the absurdity of this entire thing.
Grand.
He says.
Mum and Dad took us to the south of France for 2 weeks, and I stayed with Remus for most of July.
You're back with your parents.
Evans looks shocked, rightfully. The thought of it makes Sirius queasy.
Godric, no.
Sirius says, horrified.
James's parents.
Sirius adopted himself in.
James tells her.
Mum couldn't resist his charm.
It's the hair.
Sirius stage whispers. He winks at Evans.
Mum's used to the disaster on Prong's head. It must have been a treat to.
He's cut off by James tossing a piece of cheese at him, which bounces off his forehead and falls onto Remus's cheek.
You don't have to bring Mooney into this. He's feeling poorly.
Sirius says, plucking the cheese cube up and popping it into his mouth.
His mum also can't resist me.
Which is frankly a shock,
Prongs adds.
since I'm sure you spent half the summer with your hands down Mooney's trousers.
Sirius lifts his chin imperious.
It was a quarter at most.
He says.
And I have manners, Potter. I wasn't having my way with him in the sitting room.
Peter's gone back to making smoke shapes absent-mindedly while he stares up at the clouds.
I went to Indonesia with my dad for a bit. It was hot and boring. Brilliant couple of weeks at Prongs and Padfoots in August, though.
Had 3 weeks to myself in July while Sirius was off at Mooney's.
James says.
It's the only peace and quiet I've had since last Yule.
You've had peace and quiet.
Lily's skeptical. James laughs.
Once or twice. I don't like it. I was glad when Padfoot came home.
There's only so many times Prongs can polish his broomstick before he gets bored of it, I suppose.
Remus says sleepily from his place against Sirius's thigh, which rips a laugh out of all of them, even Prongs.
I'm thinking of getting a motorbike.
Sirius says to the world at large, but mostly Evans, one afternoon in October. He's sprawled in a window seat in the library, legs tossed casually across Remus's lap. His robe is a lumpy pillow wadded up under his head. His copy of Advanced Potion Making lies forgotten on the floor by his bag. Remus groans.
Not this again.
Yes, this again.
Sirius says.
You're going to kill yourself.
Remus says.
I don't reckon I will, actually. It seems easier than riding a broom, and I'm excellent at that.
You've almost killed yourself a dozen times on a broom this year alone.
Sirius pushes himself up on his elbows and makes a face at him.
Only because Prongs won't spot me.
Lily, talk some sense into him, please.
Lily looks up from Hecklebeat's Advanced Arithmancy.
A motorbike.
Yeah.
Sirius says, slumping back against his robe pillow.
Mooney's neighbour has one. It's brilliant. Mum says I can keep it in the shed. Uncle Alphard will lend me the gold. I've got it all sorted out.
Except for the part where you break your own neck.
Remus says, stabbing his quill down hard onto his scroll of notes.
Spoil sport. You're usually not this.
Sirius twists one hand in the air, searching for the word.
Prefectly.
I prefer your face as it is, not smeared across the road.
He notes something on Gamp's law with surprising viciousness. Sirius will help him with transfigs later, once they're alone and he's come around to the idea of Sirius in a leather jacket. Sirius is sure that'll be enough to change Prefect Mooney's mind.
You could charm it.
Evans suggests.
For safety and all that.
Sirius pauses, considering this.
There's an idea?
He says.
Think I could charm it to fly?
Remus throws his hands up.
Oh, now you've done it.
He says to Evans.
He's going to kill himself on a motorbike at 10,000 feet.
I think he's rubbish at charms.
Lies and slander.
Madam Pince shushes them from across the room, and Sirius lowers his voice.
I am perfectly proficient at charms, Evans. I'm in advanced charms with you.
Don't know what Flitwick was thinking letting you in.
She says around a laugh. Finally, Sirius thinks. He's pulled a laugh out of her. He can't relish in his personal victory, though, because he's watching Snape stalk across the library toward them, all dour-faced and greasy. Snivellus is still angry at Sirius for that small matter of almost getting him killed last year, which, fair, Sirius thinks. Now, however, he's gone and stolen Snivellus' girl. He wonders which one Snape finds more offensive.
Lily?
Snape says as soon as his shadow crosses the study table.
Severus.
She says. She does not, Sirius notes, look up from her arithmancy book.
Snape.
Sirius drawls, putting on his very best posh indifference, because he takes his new job as Evans's friend very seriously, and he hates the greasy bugger besides. Snape's eyes flick towards him for a moment, but he's not here to trade insults with Sirius.
Can I speak to you?
He asks her.
You're speaking to her now.
Sirius points out.
Alone.
He adds between gritted teeth.
No,
She says.
I'm busy.
She's busy.
Sirius picks his wand up off the table and twirls it in the fingers of his left hand. Not threatening, not yet.
Go bother someone else.
He hears Remus murmur something that sounds suspiciously like down pads, and it's hard to hold the heir to an old pureblood house mask of indifference on his face. He musters the strength to not crack a grin, because he likes this bit of the revenge plot. It plays to his strengths. He can, very easily, rub several things into Snivellus' face at once. Evans is speaking to Sirius, for one, despite 5 years of shouting at him if she paid him any attention at all. And for 2, Sirius is everything Snivellus wishes he were. Pure blood, flush with friends, freshly showered.
Black, if I were speaking to you, you would know.
Snape snaps.
I suppose I'd figure it out from the lack of slurs about my parentage.
Sirius says. He settles his wand in his palm and closes his fist around it. He's threatening now. Snape looks back at Evans.
Lily.
No, Severus.
She says.
I'm studying with Sirius and Remus.
Snape's nostrils flare.
Lupin isn't even in arithmancy.
How did I get brought into this?
Remus grumbles.
I'm just sitting here, trying to get a Transfiguration newt. And I could have been in arithmancy if I wanted it, by the way. An E is perfectly respectable.
As it happens,
Sirius cuts Remus off, sitting up and planting both feet on the ground.
I'm in both arithmancy and transfiguration, and I've gone through all the trouble of reserving this table for my friends this afternoon with Madam Pince.
He still has his wand trained on Snape, magic itching in his palm. He's losing grip on his patience. Snape casts a glance at Pince, sitting at the circulation desk. She's pretending to read the novel in her hands, but Sirius knows she's watching them like a hawk. He rather likes the tables near the windows, so he would prefer not to have to hex Snape and lose his reserving privileges for the whole term. Snape seems to have the same idea. He turns back to Evans.
At least give me a chance to apologize.
He says.
Please, Lily.
Sirius feels a twinge of pity, but he squashes it before it can fully form. Evans is half furious, shoulders squared. She's got her wand clutched in her fist, and she still hasn't looked up from her book. Sirius wonders idly if she's going to hex him or punch him in his stupid nose.
You've already said everything I need to hear.
She says.
I'm busy, Severus.
She goes back to viciously casting highlighting charms at her book. Snape stands there, staring at her, gaping like a fish. Sirius keeps his wand trained on Snivellus, unwavering, waiting for him to flap off back into the dungeon where he belongs. It's Moony who breaks the stalemate with a silent twitch of his arm.
I'm trying.
He says irritably as Snape throws his hand over his mouth and turns to flee, probably to the loo.
To study.
Sirius is struck in that moment by how much he loves Remus Lupin. The Sixths are all spread out in the common room, late Thursday afternoon before Halloween. Moony's trouncing Potter on the chessboard, and Peter's off flirting with Meadows again, which means Sirius can be left alone on his favorite couch with his pleasure reading. He's moved on to the science fiction shelf in the library, tearing through Isaac Asimov's entire collection, and he's considering a torrid love affair with Pince for suggesting it to him. He suspects Remus would disapprove. Evans is writing a letter, the kind of letter that makes her look sad and distant and reminds Sirius of the few times he wrote home in first year.
Breaking hearts, Evans.
He asks.
No,
She answers with a sigh.
I'm writing home. It's just hard.
Suppose I know what you mean.
He says.
Well, sort of.
He amends.
They're nervous about the owls.
She shoots him a sad smile.
And, well, everything else.
Moony's mum likes the owls.
Sirius tells her.
She says they're more efficient than the postal men.
Evans laughs at that.
I wish I could call them sometimes, though.
With the telephone.
Sirius brightens.
Remus taught me how to call for takeaway this summer.
Wizards.
She says, exasperated.
But I miss talking to my mum and dad, and sometimes even my sister.
You've got a sister.
You wouldn't like her.
Evans puffs out a bitter laugh.
She thinks I'm a freak.
Well, you are a bit. With your 3 different ink pots and your highlighting charms.
That's being a good student.
She says.
Not that you would have any idea what that's like.
Sirius snaps his fingers. They spark and catch, and he's holding a tiny flame between his thumb and pointer finger.
I do all right.
That's a parlour trick.
Evans sniffs. He blows the flame out.
How many owls did you get?
8.
She says.
3 E's and 5 O's.
Or Evans, 8, that's adorable.
He smirks playfully at her.
10. 7 O's, 2 E's, and an A. Fucked myself in divs, I can't take it seriously.
10.
She gives him a speculative once-over.
How?
It's going to hurt to hear that Potter got 9 O's, isn't it?
He asks.
It hurt me. He wouldn't shut up about it all summer.
You're joking.
Am not.
He says.
The mischief is educational, as it turns out. Plus, Wormtail talks in his sleep, recites things from his notes sometimes. It's like a study session.
She pauses, thinking. They're quiet for long enough that Sirius goes back to his book.
You know,
She says slowly.
I think I was wrong. About you lot.
He looks up at her.
You weren't.
You're nothing like I thought.
She says.
I'm not going to lie to you and tell you I've changed.
He closes his book and sets it on the end table by his tea.
I was always like this. Angrier, maybe, before I ran away.
I thought you were a bully.
She says. His alarm charm rings out of his wand, tossed on the sofa beside him.
I am.
He tells her. He shoves his wand and his book into his bag and slides his boots back on as he gets to his feet.
I've got detention.
Sirius.
But he's gone, pausing on his way toward the portrait hole to kiss Remus goodbye and taunt James's king before Remus takes him. On Halloween morning, it's a return to form for them. Sirius and James spend the early morning hours in the Great Hall, charming the floating jack-o'-lanterns to spit pumpkin seeds at passing students. Peter proves to be a great test subject because he thinks it's hilarious, and he runs down the row between Gryffindor and Hufflepuff, laughing his head off and getting pummeled with projectiles. They clear out, vanishing the evidence from the floor with flicks of their wands before even the early risers make it to breakfast. Remus joins them on the second-floor landing at the top of the grand staircase after the Sunday morning prefect meeting. He nods to the lads and kisses Sirius hello.
Is it done?
He asks quietly.
Chaos will reign.
James says.
Keep your eyes on them. They don't go off if you're looking at them.
Oh, that's smart.
Remus says.
My idea.
Peter tells him.
I kept getting seeds to the face while I was running the gauntlet.
We're not trying to take people's eyes out.
Sirius agrees as he pulls Remus in for a proper kiss. James gags somewhere off to the right, but Sirius doesn't care because Remus's fingers slip up into his curls and Remus smells like soap and parchment and tastes like bergamot.
Hello?
Sirius says when he pulls away. Remus smiles his lopsided smile, and Sirius dips close again to press his lips against the thin scar on his bottom lip.
Hi.
Remus clears his throat.
Mischief.
Managed.
Sirius promises.
Though you were missed.
Clearly.
Remus murmurs.
Well, gentlemen,
Peter says, clapping his hands together.
shall we go to breakfast?
They tromp down the stairs like children on Christmas morning. Shacklebolt, a fifth-year Ravenclaw prefect, eyes them suspiciously as they pause at the door to the Great Hall.
What are you up to?
Evans asks as she comes up behind them. Sirius turns to her and gives her a blinding grin. He tosses one arm over her shoulder and tugs her close.
Eyes up, Lily.
He says into her ear.
It's going to be a great day.
Finite. Thanks for listening to this text-to-speech podfic composed by Burning Aurora and Kaliana.